Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Welcome back for another episode. Today, I'm going to visit with Aamil Sarfani. I met Aamil at a podcasting event, and it was actually at his commercial building. And it was a built out facility for work sharing, and it was a really nice facility. I got to talking to him, and it turns out he had a really interesting story. So I asked him if he would come on the pod, and he said yes. So with that incredibly long-winded introduction, Emil, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Yeah, no problem. First of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate this. It's something I enjoy doing. And I know at the podcasting event, we had a really nice conversation about commercial real estate. And there's a lot of stuff that's happening right now, changing in the marketplace, especially when it comes to shared workspace and how we work. And so I appreciate the opportunity to come onto your show and talk about it.
Could you start with telling us a little bit about your professional background and what led you to Sarvana, the founding the company, rather?
Yeah. So I am a commercial real estate broker here in San Antonio. I'm born and raised, so it's been really fun to be a commercial real estate broker here in town because I get to be a part of a lot of the growth and change that's happening here in San Antonio. It means a lot to me. I got my real estate license back in 2013 when I was still in college, actually, as just something I did in one of the summers. It was to get my license. And the idea here was that I grew up in a community of a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs, people who moved here from India in the late 80s. So there's a big immigrant kind of a wave that happened from India in the late 80s. And a lot of those people that came here, including my own family, got into a lot of entrepreneurship, whether it was gas stations, grocery stores, jewelry shops, marble slabs, pizza joints, you name it. You know, a lot of the franchise concepts happen to be a lot of people in my community. And so that's a way in which I grew up. I grew up stocking shelves and learning how to run businesses from a very young age. And so that was the start of what got me interested in entrepreneurship, in business development, and then more specifically into commercial real estate, as a lot of those people in my community needed some help growing their businesses and investing money and finding property to do so in. And that's where I've been in the last kind of few years. I got more heavily involved with a brokerage here in town at Cushman and Wakefield, and was there for about a year and a half. Learned how to do other sides of commercial real estate, including tenant representation, finding space here in San Antonio for medical clinics, for other clients that came through the pipeline, and since then have opened up my own commercial real estate brokerage firm, where now I have my own slew of clients. I've got brokers underneath me that operate, and so it's been fun to see the company grow over that time period.
I believe the office building we met is named West Enclave. And if I have that correct, I was fascinated by your story of how you, first of all, scouted out and discovered this property, then redeveloped it. Could you take us through that?
Yeah, I'm very proud of this project. It's one that I found just driving around, and this is something that an old mentor of mine taught me when I was kind of young in the commercial real estate world. Was you got to drive, you got to know your market, you have to really get in the car and just see what's out there, and start meeting people. And it's crazy how simple that idea was, but it really was what the impetus of finding this property. I was driving around a neighborhood in San Antonio that's centrally located, great demographics, very easily accessible by the highways. And so I was driving around this neighborhood looking for property that I was looking for my own family as a 1031 exchange. And that is basically a method in which people sell property, reinvest that property to defer their capital gains tax. And so the idea behind a 1031 exchange is for people to reinvest any money that they get out of a sale of a property. And so that was the task at hand. I was driving around, saw this property again on a busy street, and the whole property was just desolate. It was in really bad shape. There was a couple medical tenants in the actual property. It's a total of about 68,000 square feet. 20,000 of that is in retail space. 48,000 of that was in this office building, this two-story office building. And when I scheduled a tour to come take a look at the office building, I learned that it had been vacant actually for 10 years. It used to be the old iMasters VisionWorks headquarters back in the early 2000s. In 2010, they moved out of the property. And since then, the landlord just the previous owner let the property deteriorate in a really horrible way. And so when I walked in, it was just a mess. I mean, walls that were old, spider webs everywhere. You could tell that this building needed a ton of work. We were also in the middle of the pandemic, and office space in the middle of the pandemic, with all the uncertainty that still exists about workspace, felt like a real opportunity if we could do something with that space. And so that's where the idea came from. Was we were looking for a development property. We were looking for something that we could get at a really attractive price, put some time, effort, money into it to revamp it, build value that way, and then take a portion of that office building and build out short-term flexible office space in the form of a co-working space. And so that was the initial idea. Um, so we bought the property in December of 2020. So right in the peak of the pandemic, we made a huge investment into an office building. But we went through the process of redesigning the interior. We remodeled all of it: bathrooms, corridors, lobby, flooring, everything you can imagine inside that building. We redid it, even the AC systems, and came back and took about 10,000 square feet and built out a co working space, with the idea being that although long term space in the office world was going to see a real hit in demand because of the uncertainty with the pandemic, short term space and flexible space was going to have an increase in demand because of that uncertainty. And sure enough, that's where we are today. It's worked out really nicely. The building looks beautiful. We're very proud of it. We've also been able to lease out the remaining retail space to a coffee shop and a gym, which will be added benefits to the co-working space and the long-term tenants that choose to be in this building. So we took a property that was in really bad shape, completely turned it around, and it's been a huge learning experience. And I'm excited about what we can do with it because of this experience.
So that's a really interesting story. The last office sharing space I had pre-pandemic, it was actually a gym, a national gym that built out office sharing for members like me because they knew they had a built-in audience. But I guess the thing that fascinates me the most is you said the word opportunity several times, and I'm always fascinated by people. You and I, for instance, you and I look at the same thing and you see something completely different. I see a decrepit old building. You saw opportunity, and you saw opportunity when we were still then in the very much in the throes of the pandemic. Indeed, I had COVID in December 2020. And you were able to see that although we were largely working from home, even in late 2020, returning to the office or hybrid workspace was going to be a part of the permanent workspace going forward. And so I really was fascinated by that insight you had and really wanted to explore that with you. Why did you think in December 2020, or why did you see opportunity in December 2020?
Yeah, well, it is a culmination of 7 years of experience that I had kind of put in, work that I had put in before that to understand what people are looking for in terms of space, and going through the process of finding space for other clients and going through a development process for retail buildings on another side of town. So I'm very fortunate in the opportunities I've had previous to this one, that I think led me to see what I wanted to see out of this, which for me, the way I thought about it was basically like, okay, long-term space is for sure going to be messed up. And there was no doubt. And I think that if you look back at how corporate America had been evolving up until that point, for me, I could tell that it was broken. A lot of people my age really hated going into the office. You could tell that there was a really American way of the 9 to 5 work style that to me did not feel sustainable. I felt like there needed to be some sort of evolution there. Now, of course, none of us saw a worldwide pandemic coming in to cause that. But that's what ended up happening. And it was really interesting because I've thought of co working spaces in the past. I think they're really interesting. But again, the opportunity to get into an office building that needed help. And it was kind of crazy to me at the time to know that for 10 years, people saw this property and saw a decrepit old office building. It had been vacant for so long. And in a neighborhood in San Antonio that, yes, isn't an obvious place to want to buy an office building and build a workplace like this, but really solid, great location, and it made all the sense in the world to me. And it just so happened that at that time we were in the middle of a pandemic, and if we were going to drive a hard bargain here and we were going to get property at a really good price, you had to do something like this. San Antonio has been on a growth cycle for some time, and it's hard to find real estate at real value in places in any of the major Texas cities. They've all been growing tremendously for a long time now, and so I was waiting for a change in the environment. Real estate up until that point, it seemed like since 2008, people had kind of figured out how to make money in that previous environment. It felt like people knew what to do. It felt like there wasn't really a ton of value. And what we were looking for is real value. And so for so long, I felt like I was waiting for a change in the marketplace because there wasn't in a decreasing interest rate environment. The formulas were all there, and the pandemic happened, and it required people to rethink formulas. And I just so happened to be wanting to rethink a formula. So that's honestly, I think what happened. I don't think it was necessarily anything crazy. I just think it was right place, right time, and then having the support and the wherewithal to take a shot. So.
Nothing wrong with right place, right time, but let me rephrase that to when preparation meets opportunity, luck occurs. And it sounds like you prepared, you saw the opportunity, and voila. The other thing that struck me was the work you put in to find this property. And you talked about getting out and driving around, obviously seeing a distressed, I'm going to call it a distressed property, because that enabled you to negotiate or at least have leverage to get a price that you were comfortable with for this business opportunity, but also in a broader context of essentially repurposing an existing space. You didn't have to tear down. You didn't have to build new space. You didn't have the exorbitant, I should say, the cost of new construction. I don't know about the permitting process, but perhaps that was a little bit easier because you were refurbishing essentially and bringing something up to a 2020 level as opposed to even 2010 or when it opened in the earlier part of the decade. And so you were able to kind of bring all of these strands together. Now let me ask you about the commercial side of this. Are people doing hybrid work, whether it's a person like me who's essentially a solo independent contractor? How are you actually filling your co-sharing or co-working shared space?
Yeah, look, I think work from home is awesome. I think it's good for a lot of people. I think a lot of people are productive at it. I think that it works for a lot of people, especially in their 20s and early 30s, to be able to to make that work for them. However, it's obvious to me as well that that's not super sustainable. Like at the same time as people were working from home, it was clear to me that people were also very isolated. They felt like they were stuck at home and they couldn't get out, and there wasn't a lot of places to go during that time period. And what made so much sense to me is that we are still social beings. We still need to be around people. We still need that level of get out of the house so that we can put ourselves in a different headspace so that we can get different types of work done. That makes a lot of sense to me. And so those are the types of people who are coming into our space. People who have families at home, who have dogs and wives and husbands and kids that are distracting. And so you do need to get out of the house. And those are the people who find real value here. It's a productive place. It's flexible. They can come 24/7 at their leisure whenever that works for them. And for people who are looking for a place to get out of the house, this is a really great place. And in an environment where you're actually around a lot of different companies, you're not actually just around people who work in your own company. There's a weird intangible benefit that happens where you kind of have this perception where, all right, cool. Not everyone who's around me is thinking about the same things all the time. And it's a really fun place to be for that reason. So I've really enjoyed being here. I really enjoy talking to people who find value here. So there's a lot of independent contractors that for sure see us, right? So accountants, attorneys, creatives, people who work on their own solo businesses. But there's also a lot of demand from people who, or from companies who don't know what their employees actually want. And that's a really interesting place for this type of space, is that companies are still trying to figure out how many of their employees want to be in office, how many of their employees want to be at home, who want some sort of choice between office and home whenever they feel is necessary for them to get out and get some productive work done. And so as companies figure that out, this is the type of space that they need to be in. And so it really works for a lot of different types of people and different types of companies. Also for small companies who, at the same time as this, as the demand for long-term office space is going down, construction costs are going way up. And so what happened after the pandemic is construction costs went skyrocketing high, and it made it really tough for small companies to build out office space. It's expensive space to build out. And so to have ready-made space, to have conference rooms that are high-end, that are already here, that to have the amenities of what we provide at our co-working space, it makes sense to do. And so I know I had a lot of fun understanding that demand, and what we're realizing is that demand is also changing on a daily basis, which is, again, I love being at the forefront of an insanely changing market. That was the idea here, is if we're going to make extraordinary progress or extraordinary returns, we want to be at the forefront of something that's not obvious, that people don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years. So we get to be the ones to determine what that space looks like, and that's a really fun place to be for us.
And let me use that to turn to the market going forward. Since you purchased this property, the economy has changed. Some say we went into a recession. We certainly had a slowdown or economic downturn, but we also had a very large increase in interest rates. How do you see the market for commercial real estate going in this new 2022 into 2023 and down the road era?
So especially as it relates to interest rates, I was talking to a colleague of mine a couple years back before all this stuff happened, and we were talking about how in the 80s we were looking at interest rates in the teens. You know, it was normal to have mortgage interest rates for your home in the 7 to 9%, and commercial rates higher than that in the 12 to 13%, and that's what people saw as normal, and even higher than that. So since the 80s, we've been in a decreasing interest rate environment. That gives commercial real estate developers specifically a ton of tailwind. By the time they build or do anything, interest rates have gone down even further, which makes it even easier for people to borrow. And there's this arbitrage that happens in just holding property for that amount of time, that people now are willing to pay a little bit higher price because mortgage rates are down. We are now in an entirely different market where interest rates are going up, and I don't actually know what's going to happen. I don't think anybody knows actually what's going to happen here. But what is happening, at least what I'm seeing right now, is that the market is slowing down. Interest rates are now getting close to 7%, especially after the last meeting that the Fed had and hiked up interest rates another 0.75%. So commercial rates are sitting, at around 7% for construction loans. Construction costs are still really high. It's going to cause a slowdown. We're already seeing that on the residential side. Commercial tends to lag that a little bit, but that's what we're saying. This is where trying to figure out what's next in this market is going to be really important. I don't know what that's going to look like. I know that there's going to be a slowdown here. It will very much depend on how companies react and what they end up doing. We have seen companies already start to pull back on things like infrastructure and space and rent, especially as work from home becomes more and more palatable to people. There is definitely a pull here, and what's going to happen going forward, again, is very unknown, and it's a very different market than we've seen in the last 20 to 30 years. And I think the people who figured that piece of it out on how to actually redevelop space, like we're no longer really looking at new development right now. You have to almost look at development that's already there. You have to almost look at that need rehab because it's expensive to build. It's gotten more and more expensive to build. That's alleviated a touch over the last 6 months. but there's still no doubt that construction costs are still higher than they were. So between construction costs being much higher and interest rates being much higher, we are, I think, in a recession. There's definitely a slowdown over the next 2 to 4 years, and we'll see what that actually leads to. Again, it's hard to tell exactly what's going to happen.
So let me turn to the broader Tex or San Antonio, Hill Country and Texas commercial market, because we've seen a period of not sustained growth, but just explosive growth, literally since the '08 downturn, and we came out of that. San Antonio has experienced a very large growth, largely because it's such a great place to live. Obviously, no state income tax plays a part of it, business friendly, et cetera. Nevertheless, San Antonio has been the benefit of this. Do you see this type of sustained growth down the road as well in not simply San Antonio, but the state of Texas, or are we in for perhaps a retrenchment?
I think Texas has always been a little bit more recession proof than the rest of the country, and I think there's a reason why. One of those is, we have space to continue to build out, so affordability becomes a real conversation here. You can continue to build homes and spread the city out. San Antonio is a very large city, and so as you continue and as you continue to see the growth happen, places like West San Antonio start to get activated in ways that we had never seen before. And one of the things that San Antonio does that I really appreciate is that they get ahead of infrastructure. And so they build highways, they build roads, they expand that traffic to be able to hold more cars on those roads, which again activates areas of town that hadn't necessarily been built in before. Um, so I, again, born and raised here in San Antonio, love seeing the growth. I didn't actually think I'd end up back in San Antonio because it was when I was a kid, it was seen as a boring place for families. That's what it was seen as. It still is that to some degree. It still operates as a small town, even though it's the seventh largest city in the country. It still operates like a small town at times. There's an awesome culture that gets built there. And I think for so long, especially with the growth that Austin has seen, San Antonio is that little, like, I don't know, stepbrother or whatever you want to call it to Austin and the growth that's being seen there. But what's beautiful about what's happening right now in the city of San Antonio is that San Antonio is starting to own its own culture. I think for so long we were trying to figure out what it is. How do we actually attract people to move back to San Antonio or to choose it as a real place to set up and set roots in? I think there's something happening right now in San Antonio that's causing people to really see it, especially young people, to see it as a real option to come move to. Between affordability and cool restaurants and bars and events that are constantly coming here and happening here, again, it's starting to become cooler. But because of its awesome infrastructure and because of its affordability, it's really now a really cool option outside of a place like Austin, which has a ton of traffic, has gotten crazy expensive, has seen those expenses, the prices for homes get very close to California prices, LA prices, that sort of thing. And so I think San Antonio, it is a small town feel, and it's a really cool culture here. So I love to see it. I think Texas cities are going to continue to see that growth because there is a lot of opportunity here. It's very business friendly. So companies are constantly coming here, and so much of the growth of the population is dependent on what companies choose to move their headquarters here. We're seeing that with companies like Tesla choosing to set up in Central Texas, in Austin, in and around San Antonio. I think they just took down 100,000 square feet of warehouse space or even more for some of their operations. So you're starting to see that happen here again. So I think San Antonio will continue its growth. Even if there is a slowdown, there's still a lot of in-migration happening. So I think that's good for the city.
I mean, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering before we leave, if our listeners want any more information on Sarfani Development Advisors, or really yourself or any of the topics we've touched on this podcast, what would be the best place for them to do so?
Yeah, so my website is sarfanicommercialadvisors.com. You can totally go there and see what we've got going on in terms of the projects we're working on. I'm pretty accessible. My social media is at Aamil Sarfani on Instagram. You're totally welcome to shoot me a direct message on Instagram as well. Those are the best ways to probably get in touch with me. But again, I really appreciate it, and I would love to continue the conversation about real estate topics. I think it's a fascinating time in the industry. So,
Well, Emil, I hope that we can continue this conversation. I wanted to thank you again for hosting the Podfest event that we met at. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going.
thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.